The Friday night shift started talking before anyone did. Monitors chirped and whined in overlapping rhythms. Stretchers squeaked across the waxed floor. Someone laughed too loudly near the nurses' station, trying to blow off steam. Overhead, the hospital intercom crackled with codes and bed requests that blurred together into a tired drone. The emergency department at St. Jude Memorial Hospital in Denver was full before the clock hit 8. Fluorescent lights washed everything in a hard, colorless glow, turning faces pale and the dried streaks of blood on gloves a strange rusty brown. The air carried a mix of alcohol wipes, old coffee sweat, and that faint metallic note that seemed to live in any place where pain was routine. Dr. Nathan Klein walked in as if the noise parted for him. He pushed through the automatic doors with his white coat unbuttoned and a surgical cap still shoved in his pocket. His expression was already carved into a frown like his face had forgotten any other shape. A clipboard slapped lightly against his thigh with each quick step. A paramedic was shouting vital signs from the head of a stretcher as they rolled past him. Klein did not look up from the chart in his hand until he reached the trauma bay. Then his voice cut through the chaos. "Move the crash cart out of the doorway. Not there, Reyes. Against the wall." A nurse shifted the cart without argument. Who ordered a CT on bed 6 without clearing the airway first? He did not wait for an answer. "Cancel it. We are not sending unstable lungs into a tunnel." He flicked the corner of the paper on his clipboard, then shoved it back to a young resident whose ears were turning red. "Eyes up, Collins," he said to another doctor. "This is a trauma bay, not a classroom." He liked the way people moved faster after he spoke. Liked the way heads turned toward him automatically, the way hands hesitated mid-air waiting for his confirmation. This room with its sharp lights and sharp edges and sharper choices fit him like a tailored suit. If Klein was the noise Riley, Ward was the quiet that somehow stayed standing inside it. She stood at the bedside of a thin woman in her 70s, the patient shivering under a too-thin blanket despite the heating vent above. Riley's navy scrub top had a darker patch on one shoulder where someone else's coffee had splashed and dried. Her brown hair was twisted into a low knot at the nape of her neck, a few stray strands escaping to cling to her forehead. Her badge read Ushik Ward RN. Her hand said much more. Gloved in latex, they moved with a careful confidence as she slid a small IV catheter into the soft, bruised vein at the woman's wrist. The skin there was paper-thin, mottled with age spots. One wrong angle would burst it. Riley's thumb pressed just enough, no more. The flash of dark red filled the chamber at the first attempt. "All done, Ms. Harlow," she said, taping the line gently. "You nailed it." Ms. Harlow huffed a soft laugh. "I just lay here, dear. That was you." Riley smiled a brief curve of her mouth that reached her eyes before fading. "Team effort," she replied. A cough rattled from the next bed over. Mr. Harper had been brought in an hour earlier for shortness of breath that turned out to be a flare of his chronic lung disease. Oxygen prongs rested under his nose, the tubing looped over his ears. He had the posture of someone who used to stand straight for long stretches of time and had only recently been forced to bend. He watched Riley from behind fogged-up lenses as she flushed the IV, labeled it, and checked the monitor above the bed with a quick glance. "Those hands," he rasped, his voice sandpapered by cigarettes and years. "You got soldier hands, kid." Riley turned her head. "I'm sorry." Mr. Harper nodded toward her gloves. "Steady, fast but not jumpy. I've seen that before. Desert 03. He lifted one shoulder in a tired half shrug. "Medics, the good ones." Riley looked down at her own fingers for a fraction of a second, as if she were seeing them from somewhere far away. "Just a lot of coffee and a lot of practice," she said lightly. "Try to get it right the first time. Less pokes, less cussing at me." He chuckled, the sound dissolving into a wet cough. Riley adjusted his oxygen flow by a hair and checked his pulse ox with one quick squeeze of the clip on his finger. His hand was rough knuckles swollen with arthritis. For an instant, his grip tightened on her wrist, his thumb grazing the edge of her sleeve. The cuff had ridden up just enough to show a faint pale line along the inside of her forearm, a scar that curved then disappeared beneath the fabric. Before he could look closer, she gently freed her arm. "You holler if your chest feels tighter," she said. "I am right here." "Bet you are," he muttered, but he smiled. At the nurse's station, Gloria Perez watched the exchange over the rim of her chipped mug. Gloria had been in emergency medicine long enough to recognize patterns. Complaints that always hit another diagnosis. Patients who always came back worse because they never stayed long enough the first time. Staff who burned too bright and staff who faded too soon. Riley did not fit into any of the boxes Gloria kept in her head. Most new nurses tried to claim space with noise. Jokes, stories, loud questions, anything to convince the room they belonged. Riley had done the opposite. From her first shift, she had moved like a shadow that carried supplies, drew meds, adjusted ventilator settings, and anticipated needs without leaving a trail of drama behind her. "You are going to disappear into the wall one day, Ward," Gloria had told her once. Riley had only smiled. Now Gloria took a slow sip of coffee and watched those soldier hands coil up the IV tubing loop. It just so tucked the tape so it would not tug on fragile skin. Behind them, the automatic doors wheezed open again. An EMT pushed in a stretcher with a teenage boy curled on his side, one hand pressed to his abdomen, his mother talking in panicked bursts. The triage nurse called out a room number. A toddler wailed from the waiting area. Someone swore softly as a line infiltrated and had to be restarted. The monitors answered each other in overlapping beeps, some fast, some slow, a jittery electronic chorus that never quite landed on a single song. Riley finished charting on Ms. Harlow, slid the tablet back into its slot, and moved without hurry toward the entrance bay, already glancing at the new boy's color, the way he held himself, the way his breathing hitched around each word. "Riley," a younger nurse called, jogging past with an armful of linens. "You taking the new kid, or you want me to grab him?" "I got him," Riley said. "You helped Gloria move Mr. Lopez to OB." The younger nurse nodded and peeled off. Riley greeted the EMT with a nod, one hand already reaching for a blood pressure cuff. Her voice stayed low even as the boy's mother spoke faster. "Ma'am, I hear you," Riley said, her tone smooth as a level line. "Let me get your son's pain under control, then you can tell me every detail. He is going to breathe, and he is going to talk, and we are going to take care of him." The words were simple, but the way she said them nudged the air around the gurney into something calmer. Across the room, Klein glanced up from the chart he was signing. For half a second, his eyes tracked the small cluster forming around the new patient, Riley, the EMT, the mother. He seemed about to walk over. Then a resident at his elbow cleared his throat. "Dr. Klein, the CT on bed 3, is asking if we approve contrast." Klein's attention snapped back. "Of course we approve contrast," he said. "We are not guessing in the dark." He signed, flipped another page, and the moment passed. The shift slid deeper into the night. The waiting room filled to standing space, then thinned a little, then filled again. On the big wall clock above the charge desk, red hands crept toward 9, then 10. The fluorescent lights kept shining unblinking, washing the stains out of color, but not out of existence. Riley wrapped a fresh blanket around Ms. Harlow's shoulders, checked Mr. Harper's numbers one more time, and washed her hands in water that ran lukewarm. No matter how long she turned the handle, when she stepped back into the heart of the emergency department, her shoes squeaked on a line of dried saline someone had spilled and not yet mopped. Her hands were clean again, for the moment at least. The monitors kept talking. Riley listened. By 11, the emergency department felt like it was breathing on its own. Admissions came in pulses. A cluster of chest pains, a lull. 2 drug overdoses, another lull. A broken wrist from an ice patch on a front step. A feverish toddler who vomited on her own blanket and then promptly fell asleep on Riley's shoulder while they waited for a room. The sounds rose and fell in the same pattern. Monitors' wheels, the soft rip of tape. Every few minutes, the automatic doors sighed open and spilled in another piece of the city. At 11:15, Gloria checked the tracking board and made a decision. She tapped her pen against the glass screen, then turned to the nearest nurse. "Pull everybody in. 5-minute huddle." There were no walls to close, so they carved a circle out of the hallway between the nurses' station and the trauma bay. Nurses came in twos, one eye on their patients. Residents drifted over with stethoscopes still around their necks. Klein arrived last, flipping through a chart and capping his pen with a sharp click. Gloria kept it quick. "Beds 3 and 8 are waiting on imaging. 9 is going up to ICU. We got 6 in the waiting room who can sit. The ambulance bay is clear for the moment." She looked around the group, eyes landing on each person in turn. "I know it is Friday. I know you are tired. Nobody drowns on my shift because someone forgot to ask for help. You are drowning, you yell." There were a few smiles. Someone muttered a quiet, "Yes, ma'am." Klein stepped forward, claiming the static in the air. "All right," he said. "We are holding for at least 2 transfers. That means no wandering off for smoke breaks. If you are in the circle, you stay reachable." His gaze swept over faces sharp and unsparing until it settled on Riley where she stood near the back. "Ward." She straightened a little. "Not much. Enough." "Yes, Dr. Klein. You are on beds 5, 7, and 12, correct?" "Yes. From now until handoff, I want you off trauma. No critical triage decisions, no pushing meds without clearance, no making suggestions that start with 'I think' in front of patients. You keep the nice ones alive and comfortable. The grandmas, the flu cases, the sprained ankles. Herd them through. That is your lane tonight." A small ripple moved through the group. Some people looked down at their shoes. One of the residents stayed very still, eyes fixed on a point above Klein's shoulder. Color rose along Riley's neck beneath her scrub collar, then faded. "Understood," she said. Klein tilted his head, studying her for a beat as if waiting for protest. When none came, he turned away. Collins, you take her trauma slot. Myers, you stick to my hip. If I catch you guessing, you are back in clinic for a month." He snapped the Sharpie back into his pocket. "All right, go back to work." The circle dissolved. Nurses peeled away to their rooms, residents scattered. The monitors took over the talking again. Gloria stayed where she was for a second longer, watching Riley walk towards Bed 7 chart already in hand. The younger nurse who had carried linens earlier fell in step beside her. "That was rough," the younger nurse murmured. "It is fine," Riley said. "He likes clear lanes." "Still, you do half his job when he is not looking." Riley's mouth twitched. "Do not let him hear you say that." They separated at the row of curtains. The younger nurse ducked into a room. Riley approached bed 7, where a young woman sat, hugging her own ribs, face pale under smeared mascara. "Hi, I am Nurse Ward," Riley said, pulling the curtain closed behind her. "What are we dealing with?" "Concrete," the woman said through clenched teeth. "I went snowboarding. The concrete came up to say hello. It hurts when I breathe." Riley listened to her lungs, fingers pressed against the spaces between bone as the woman inhaled. The breath sounds were clear. The wince was sharp. "Probably bruised ribs," Riley said. "They feel worse than broken ones sometimes. I will get you a pain plan and a wrap. You board often." "Every weekend I can," the woman replied. "I'm not supposed to be here. I'm supposed to be in a cabin with my friends and cheap beer." Riley checked the monitor, set up the pain meds, wrapped the ribs in a snug elastic band that let the young woman breathe without flinching so hard. "Text them," Riley said as she taped the end of the wrap. "Tell them you will win next time." The woman laughed weakly. "What makes you think I did not win already?" She lifted a hand. Riley slapped it lightly with her own glove against skin. In bed 12, a boy of 8 sat rigid on the gurney while his father paced in small agitated circles. The boy's arm was crooked, swelling near the wrist, his lower lip chewed almost raw. "I told you not to jump off the roof," the father said for the 3rd time. "It was the shed," the boy muttered. "The roof of the shed," the father said. "Do not make it sound better." Riley introduced herself, crouched so she was at eye level with the boy. Up close, she could see the sheen of sweat on his forehead and the way he held his breath each time his fingers moved. "I know it looks funny," she said softly, glancing at his wrist. "It does not scare me." "It scares me," he admitted. "Good," she said. "That means you will remember this when the next roof tries to talk you into jumping." The corner of his mouth twitched despite the pain. She splinted the arm temporarily, talking him through each step, letting him choose the color of the wrap. He picked bright green. "Like a lizard," he said. "Good choice," Riley replied. "Lizards are fast. You will be fast again, just not on roofs." In the hallway, Klein strode past already onto his next problem. There was no single moment when a pattern became clear. It was small things repeated. At bed 5, an older man with abdominal pain lay stiff under the sheet, insisting it was probably the chili. Riley watched the way he guarded his right lower side, the way he flinched when she pressed lightly, and the way his face relaxed when she lifted her hand. She mentioned possible appendicitis to the resident. "Could be," he said, distracted. "We will wait on labs." Riley charted her note anyway. On her way back from the supply closet, she paused by a monitor that did not sound quite right. The rhythm strip showed an irregular pattern that was not yet wild, but had taken a wrong turn. She stepped into the room, greeted the older woman in the bed, and checked the lead placement. One pad had loosened with sweat, altering the reading. When she fixed it, the line straightened. No alarm, no crisis, just quiet prevention. Nobody saw that except the patient who smiled and squeezed her hand. As the hours dragged, the line between nice patients and critical blurred. In one room, Riley sat with a middle-aged man while he waited for blood work results. He joked to mask his nerves. His hands twisted his wedding ring around and around. The TV in the corner played a late-night show with the sound off. Riley listened more to his breathing than his words. In another, she reassured a college student with a panic attack that felt exactly like a heart attack until the tests came back normal. The student's eyes held the same panic even after he knew the truth. Riley taught him how to count his own breaths, how to press his fingers into the tendons at the base of his thumb to ground himself. Between rooms, she washed her hands. The sink never got warmer. Her fingers reddened from the soap and scrub. At one point, she and Gloria almost collided in the doorway of the med room. "How are your grandmas and flu cases?" Gloria asked. "They are feisty," Riley said, "and hydrated." Gloria narrowed her eyes. "And how are you?" Riley shrugged one shoulder. "Busy is good. You are not a bartender. You do not have to pretend busy feels like a win." Riley smiled, a small tired thing. "It feels like I'm doing something." Gloria watched her for a moment more, then nodded. "You are. Do not let his lanes get into your head." "They are just lanes," Riley replied. "Patients are still patients." She grabbed a tray of syringes and left without waiting for a response. Near 2 in the morning, a paramedic crew rolled in. A man with a gash across his forehead and the heavy musk of alcohol. He sang a slurred country song while they wheeled him, blood drying in his hair. Klein appeared at the foot of the bed, a moment later spoke with the medic, ordered a scan, and stepped out to dictate a note into the phone cradled at his ear. As he walked past the nurse's station, he caught a glimpse of Riley through the glass of room 7. She was adjusting the pillow under Ms. Harlow's shoulders, then straightening the IV line so it did not pull. Her hands moved with a familiarity that anything repeated often enough would have, yet there was a precision in each small adjustment that made it look chosen, not automatic. Klein stopped long enough to frown. "Ward, Ethan," where he called. She stepped out of the room, pulling the door gently closed behind her. "Yes, doctor." "Did you sign off on the morphine for bed 4? "Yes, the order is in the chart. I double-checked his renal function." Klein glanced at the screen at the station, confirmed, then looked back at her. "You are not here to outthink the orders, Viaisho," he said. "You are here to carry them out safely. You stay in that lane, you will do fine." Riley felt the words land and sink like small stones dropped in water. "Understood," she said. He nodded, already turning away. As he walked off, Gloria exhaled slowly and rolled her chair a few inches closer to Riley. "He ever talks to you like that? And it actually matches what you did wrong," Gloria said. "I will bring you coffee and we can dissect it together. Tonight was not that." "I did not take it personally," Riley replied. "That is the problem," Gloria said softly. "You should sometimes." Riley looked at her hands. There were faint pressure marks on her fingers where gloves had dug in for hours. "I have had beds to check," she said. "I know," Gloria answered. "Go." The night edged closer to morning. The waiting room emptied slightly and filled again. Somewhere on another floor, a baby cried its first breaths. Somewhere on another block, someone made a choice that would send them here in an hour. In the middle of it, Riley moved from room to room, one steady pair of hands among many, her quiet woven so tightly into the fabric of the shift that it was easy to forget how rare that steadiness was. By the time the clock over the charged desk crept past 6, the night had thinned out. The waiting room was down to one man snoring softly in a plastic chair and a teenager scrolling on her phone while cradling an ice pack against her ankle. The harsh fluorescent light had softened into something weary rather than sharp. Even the monitors seemed to beep with less urgency. Day shifts started to seep in, smelling of fresh shampoo and fresh coffee. Scrub tops and brighter colors appeared among the dark blues and grays of the night crew. The air turned a little louder as people greeted each other, trading brief headlines about the hours they had missed. Riley stood at the station and finished her last charting. Her handwriting on the tablet screen was clean and small. Vitals responses, the little notes she left herself about what each patient had actually said, not just what their body had done. Mr. Harper had asked about the Broncos. Ms. Harlow had told her about a long-ago trip to the mountains. The boy with the green wrap had fallen asleep gripping his new lizard arm like it was a badge of honor. "Sign out when you can, Ward," Gloria said, walking past with a sheaf of papers in one hand. "You have been here all night." "Yes, ma'am," Riley answered. She sent the last chart closed out of the system and slid the tablet into its dock. Her shoulders ached in a dull, steady way from hours of lifting, bending, turning. Her hands felt empty once she pulled off her final pair of gloves and dropped them in the bin. At the locker room, she spun the combination without looking, the numbers long since burned into her muscles. The metal door squealed a little as it opened. She swapped her navy scrubs for a faded gray hoodie and jeans, stuffed her shoes into a cloth bag, and pulled on a pair of worn sneakers that had once been white. In the reflection of the small metal mirror inside the locker, her face looked flatter than it felt. Dark circles under her eyes, a crease where her mask usually sat. A strand of hair had worked free of the knot and plastered itself against her cheek. She smoothed it back. The door swung open behind her. "All right, night warriors," a nurse from the day shift called. "We are hitting O'Malley's for breakfast beers. Who is in?" There were a few groans, some laughs, one or two enthusiastic shouts from the end of the row. Gloria appeared in the doorway, cup of coffee in hand. "Not me," she said. "I'm going home to my quiet couch and my loud husband." She looked at Riley, eyebrows lifting. "You Ward." Riley slid her stethoscope into her backpack and zipped it. "Rain check," she said. "I have laundry and a date with my couch." One of the younger nurses leaned around a locker door. "You always say that," she said. "One day we will find out your couch is a cover story." Riley smiled. "If it is doing a great job." They laughed, and the chatter moved on to weekend plans, babysitters, snow on the forecast. Riley slung her backpack over one shoulder and slipped out while the focus drifted away from her. In the parking lot, the cold hit her straight in the throat. Denver's morning air bit through the thin cotton of her hoodie, smelling of exhaust and snow and the faint citrus from the hospital's landscaping that never quite faded. Her breath hung in front of her in small white puffs as she crossed the cracked asphalt toward her car, an old sedan that coughed twice before the engine turned over. She sat for a moment, fingers curled around the steering wheel, letting the heat stutter to life. The sky on the eastern horizon was starting to lighten, a line of pale gray pushing back against the night. When she finally drove away from St. Jude, the hospital shrank in her rearview mirror, just another square building with square windows and a rooftop crowded with mechanical equipment. The red emergency sign glowed over the entrance, steady and constant. Traffic was thin. She hit every light green. The city at that hour felt like it had taken a long, deep breath and had not yet decided what to do with it. Riley's apartment building sat above a laundromat and a closed taqueria on a side street that always smelled faintly of soap and stale oil. She parked in the narrow alley, shouldered her backpack again, and climbed the concrete stairs to the second floor. Inside, the space was small and familiar. A couch that sagged slightly in the middle, a narrow bed, 2 bookcases that bowed under the weight of medical texts, a few novels, and a tin box with a dented lid. The kitchen was little more than a strip of counter with a sink and a stove. The window over the sink looked out onto the brick wall of the next building with a slice of sky visible if she tipped her head just right. She dropped her keys in the chipped bowl by the door and set her backpack on the table. The couch would have been easy. Toed off shoes, collapsed sideways sleep until noon. Instead, she walked to the small closet and pulled out a plastic storage bin. Inside lay a neatly packed mannequin head and torso, the kind sold for basic CPR classes, its features smooth and anonymous. Next to it were coiled lengths of tubing, a laryngoscope handle, and blades, a bag valve mask, and a thick rectangle of dense foam. She cleared the coffee table and set the mannequin on it, the foam block beside it. The movements had the ease of routine. From her backpack, she took out a worn spiral notebook. The cover had once been blue. Now it was closer to gray, its edges rounded and soft from years of handling. On the front, faded black ink spelled out a name and a set of numbers. R. Ward Viper 6. She traced the letters once with the tip of her finger, then opened the notebook. Sketches filled the pages. Some were crisp diagrams of airways and chest cavities. Others rough layouts of improvised treatment stations and triage lines. Notes crowded the margins in a compact hand. Breathe, bleed, brain. Never treat what looks worst, treat what kills fastest. Use what you have, not what you wish you had. On one of the back pages, the ink changed. The hand was different, firmer, tighter. Riley, remember, steady hands save more than fast ones. You were born with steady. The signature below it was sharp enough to still be clear even where the page had worn thin. Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Ward. She shut the notebook before the lines could blur. In the small kitchen, she started the kettle, poured coffee grounds into the filter, and moved back to the living room while the water heated. She slid a fresh blade onto the laryngoscope handle, checked the light, then set the timer on her phone. ID. The airway. Secure the airway, she said quietly under her breath. The buzz of the timer sounded, and she began. Blade into the mannequin's mouth, sweep the tongue, find the epiglottis lift, visualize the chords, insert the tube not too deep, not too shallow, inflate secure bag. She stopped the timer, checked the numbers, then unlaced the tape and pulled the tube out. She reset the timer. Again. Her hands moved with the same precision she had shown in the trauma bay, but here there were no witnesses, no beeping monitors, no anxious family members at the foot of the bed. Just the soft click of plastic against plastic and the quiet rasp of her breath. After a dozen reps, her shoulders burned. She shifted to the foam block marked with faded ink circles where she had aimed before. She picked up a large bore needle and placed her fingertips where ribs would meet cartilage if the foam were a human chest. The needle pierced the foam with a dull pop. She listened for the imaginary hiss of trapped air sawed in her mind. The kettle whistled from the kitchen. She set the needle down, pinched the bridge of her nose, and stayed where she was for a moment, eyes closed. Another sound rose in the quiet of the apartment. Not real, but very clear. A helicopter rotor somewhere overhead, the whump-whump of blades beating hot desert air instead of cold Denver sky. A radio voice in her ear, clipped and urgent. Viper 6, we are losing Bravo team, you got 30 seconds copy. Her jaw clenched. The phantom voice faded. The kettle kept whistling. Real sound, real steam. She got up, poured water over the coffee grounds, watched the dark liquid collect in the pot. The smell filled the small space, familiar and grounding. Cup in hand, she sat on the floor instead of the couch, back against the sofa cushions, notebook open across her knees. Her eyes landed on a different page halfway through. The notes there were about splenic injuries and delayed hemorrhage and blunt trauma. A memory surfaced not from a battlefield, but from St. Jude's own fluorescent world. It had been 3 weeks earlier. A motorcycle crash on a rain-slicked street. The rider had walked into the emergency department, helmet in hand, grinning sheepishly, insisting he was fine except for a little soreness. His vitals had been decent. Blood pressure just a little soft, heart rate a little high. The resident had been more interested in the laceration on his scalp than the way he kept one hand clamped over his left side. Riley had stood beside the bed, watching the way his breath shortened each time he shifted. "His numbers are drifting," she had said to the resident, keeping her voice low. "They do not fit his story. I would get imaging sooner rather than later." The resident had waved a hand eyes on the computer. "We have sicker people ahead of him," he had replied. "He is talking, he is walking. If it gets worse, we will call for a scan. Go start that IV in Bay 2. She had done as she was told. 2 hours later, the motorcycle rider had gone gray on the bed, eyes wide, sweat pouring off his forehead. The monitor had told the story before he could. Blood pressure dropping, heart rate climbing, skin cold and clammy. Then everyone had moved. Stat orders shouted names, a rush to the scanner, a call to surgery. Splenic rupture, massive bleed near miss. Nobody had asked who had first said imaging out loud. Nobody had asked who had been standing still enough to see what was coming. Riley took a slow drink of coffee. She flipped to a clean page in the notebook and wrote in the same compact script she used for everything else. Pattern-delayed splenic bleed, blunt trauma. ER eyes must be as sharp as field eyes. She underlined the last 4 words once. Outside her window, a helicopter really did pass by, heading toward the downtown hospital. Its lights traced a brief line across the slice of visible sky, then vanished beyond the brick. Riley closed the notebook, stacked the equipment back into the plastic bin, and slid it against the wall. She left the mannequin out, its blank face turned toward the ceiling. Her couch was still there, patient and soft. She lay down without bothering to pull a blanket over herself, one arm slung over her eyes to block the light leaking around the edges of the blinds. For a while, the only sound in the apartment was the ticking of the cheap clock on the wall and the distant traffic below. Her hands finally lay still on her stomach, the lingering memory of the night's work and the practice session humming quietly like a muscle that had been used just enough. By the next Friday, the snow had decided to stay. It lay in a thin, dirty crust along the curbs outside St. Jude Memorial, pushed into ridges by tires and boots, refrozen into slick patches where the sun never quite reached. The sky over Denver hung low and gray, the kind of ceiling that made the streetlights flick on earlier than anyone wanted. Riley stamped melted slush off her shoes on the mat, just inside the staff entrance, and tugged off her knit cap. Her hair clung to her forehead for a moment before she scraped it back into a knot at the base of her neck. She felt the familiar shift as she stepped from the quiet hallway into the noise of the emergency department. It was just after 3 in the afternoon, the shift change hour. Day shift flowed around night shift badges, passing each other voices, trading rapid summaries. Chest pain in 4s ruled out, waiting on discharge papers. Psych consult in 10. He is calm for now, but his sister says that never lasts. 12 needs a repeat set of vitals when you get a chance. The kid will not stop talking about lizards. Riley smiled faintly at that one. At the charge desk, Gloria stood with a clipboard and a pen tucked behind one ear. Her dark hair was pulled back tight, but a few silver strands had escaped near her temple. She had a half-empty coffee cup at her elbow, the surface of the liquid filmed over with a skin from neglect. "Ward," she called as Riley approached, "you are with me." Riley set her backpack on the shelf under the desk and pulled out her stethoscope. "Good afternoon," she said. "That is optimistic," Gloria replied. "Listen." She tilted her head toward the far corner of the desk, where a small police scanner sat tucked between stacks of old forms. Its constant murmur was part of the background most nights, as easy to ignore as the hum of the lights. Today the radio chatter had a harder edge. "Black ice on the viaduct, use caution on the overpass. Minor MVA on Colfax, no injuries. Tow requested on I-70 westbound shoulder lane. Snow and traffic, bad combination. Roads are getting slick," Gloria said. "It is not a blizzard, but people forget how to drive the second they see powder. Expect more car stuff, less bar fights." "Not sure which I prefer, Riley. Is so safer," Riley said. "Car stuff does not throw punches at you," Gloria pointed out. "It is polite enough to save that for the engine block." Klein appeared at the far end of the desk, shrugging out of a black wool coat. Snowflakes clung to the shoulders for a moment before melting under the heat of the room. He draped the coat over the back of a chair and smoothed his white coat with one hand, more habit than necessity. "All right," he said more to the room than to anyone in particular. "I just came from the department meeting. Radiology is backed up, so do not order scans for curiosity. I want reasons, real ones." He picked up the census sheet Gloria had just printed and scanned it quickly. "We are full in the back," he said. "Hallway beds if you have to, but do not block the trauma bay." "Too late," someone muttered. "We have 2 back there already." Klein lifted his head. "Then find somewhere else to put them. That space stays clear. If something bad happens in this city, it comes through that door." His pen tapped the paper twice a tiny staccato. Gloria caught Riley's eye and gave a barely visible shrug. You heard him, she said. No cozy hallway dates. Riley pulled her badge from her pocket and clipped it to her scrub top. Her fingers brushed the familiar curve of the plastic, then dropped. What am I on tonight? She asked. Gloria pointed with her pen. You start with beds 3, 6, and 9. Couple of chest pains and a fall. We will shift as the board changes. Riley nodded. In ward, Gloria added more quietly, lanes or no lanes, if you see something, you say something. To me, at least. I know, Riley said. She moved into the stream of the shift. At bed 3, a middle-aged woman in a puffer jacket lay rigid fingers clenched in the blanket. Her eyes flicked between the television in the corner and the monitor above her head. I am fine now, the woman said as Riley checked her blood pressure. It was just the one time. My chest felt tight, but it is gone. Riley watched the numbers on the screen. Let us keep you on the monitor until the labs are back, she said. If it does not come back, that is good news. At bed 6, an older man with a bruised cheekbone insisted he had tripped on a rug. His adult daughter stood with her arms folded, jaw set. Tell her what happened, the daughter said. He sighed. I was on the ladder, he admitted. Cleaning out the gutters, I slipped. Riley palpated along his ribs, feeling for crepitus, listening for a change in the sound of his breath. Snow ladders, slick roofs. She shook her head once barely. You landed on your left side, she said. He blinked. How did you know? She smiled. Lucky guess. By 6:30, the beds were full again. The scanner chattered on. Fender bender at Spear and Federal. Traffic slowing on I-70 at the interchange. Snow continued to fall in light, steady grains sticking to anything that stayed still long enough. Just after 7, Gloria waved Riley over to the desk. New orders, she said. Administration just called. You are going to love this. Klein joined them, a crease between his eyebrows that had not been there an hour before. They want me upstairs, well, he said. Budget review, compliance updates, a nice long conversation about how much everything costs. They picked a great time, Gloria said dryly. They always do, he replied. They hear Friday and full board and think perfect audience. He tapped the census sheet again. I will be in the conference room for an hour, he said. Maybe 2 if someone brings spreadsheets. Do not page me for nonsense. If a toenail falls off, you handle it. Gloria nodded once. If a heart falls off, she said, we will think about calling you. Klein smirked despite himself. I know you will. You are not the ones I worry about. His eyes slid to Riley. Ward, he said. Last week we had a conversation about lanes. It still applies. Riley met his gaze calmly. I remember. You see anything weird, you take it to Gloria or to one of the attendings. You do not start a sideshow in front of the whole department. I understand. He held her eyes for another fraction of a second, as if searching for something, then apparently decided he had found enough. You will be fine, he said. Just keep the stable ones stable and do not go hunting for heroics. He grabbed his coat and slung it over one arm. I will be back before you have a chance to miss me, he added half joking. Try not to let the place burn down. Bring back coffee, Gloria called after him. In this economy, he shot back over his shoulder, you will get water and like it. The automatic doors swallowed him, and his footsteps faded toward the elevators. For a moment, the charge desk felt oddly exposed. Gloria rolled her shoulders as if adjusting to a weight she knew well. All right, she said to the air. We have done this without him before. She looked at Riley. You keep your eyes on your rooms. If something feels off, you tell me. Do not talk yourself out of it. Yes, ma'am, Riley said. She went back to bed 3, reviewed the lab results, and reassured the woman in the puffer jacket that the enzymes were normal, the EKG unchanged. Anxiety, not infarction. Relief loosened the patient's grip on the blanket. At bed 9, a man with a sprained knee complained about the wait time and the parking fee. Riley wrapped the joint, taught him how to use crutches properly, and listened to him grumble without taking any of it in. 7:30 bled into 8. The sky outside the few narrow windows had shifted from gray to deep blue, then to a flat, reflective dark. Streetlights glowed in halos through the snow. Inside, the scanners and monitors kept their own clock. Unit 42, respond to rollover on Alameda. Single vehicle, unknown injuries. Gloria's head turned toward the scanner. That is not ours, she said mostly to herself. Too far south. A few minutes later, the radio crackled again. All units be advised multiple reports of spinouts eastbound I-70. Use caution. Spinouts, rollovers, black ice. Riley moved between her rooms, checking vitals, adjusting drips, writing notes. Her skin prickled once for no obvious reason, the way it did when a storm was far off but headed in the right direction. She walked past the open door of the trauma bay. The overhead lights were dimmed, the gurney stripped and waiting. A stack of neatly folded sheets sat on the counter. The monitor in the corner was dark, the cords coiled. The room looked smaller when it was empty. It held its own kind of stillness, not peaceful, not tense, just resting. Riley paused in the doorway. Her hands flexed once at her sides as if they remembered a different posture. She thought of the lines she had written in her notebook at home, the ones about ER eyes and field eyes. The words felt close, like they were just under her skin, following the path of her veins. Riley? Gloria's voice pulled her back. Riley turned. Gloria stood at the end of the hall, a chart in hand. "We have a new one in Bay 4, Gloria said. "Abdominal pain, low-grade vitals. Came from urgent care. They did not like his numbers and sent him here." "On my list," Riley said. "Now he is," Gloria replied, holding out the chart. As Riley took it, the scanner popped again, louder this time. "Dispatch to all units. Multi-vehicle collision reported on I-70 eastbound near exit 241. Possible entrapments. Fire and EMS responding." The words hung in the air for a second, then sank into the ongoing hum of the department. Gloria's eyes flickered toward the ambulance doors. "Here we go," she said quietly. Riley folded the chart under her arm and walked toward Bay 4, the sound of the scanner following her down the hall. Bay 4 smelled like antiseptic and fear. The man on the bed was in his late 50s, his work shirt still on, name patch darkened with sweat. His face shone with a thin sheen of moisture that did not match the cool temperature of the room. He kept one hand pressed low over his abdomen, as if he could hold something in place by will alone. "They said it was probably just a stomach bug," he said when Riley walked in. "At urgent care, but then my blood pressure dropped and they looked at me like I was a grenade." Riley glanced at the monitor. The numbers were not terrible. Not good, but not the worst she had seen. Blood pressure a little soft, heart rate a little fast. Respiration rate higher than it should have been for someone who claimed he was only uncomfortable. "How long has the pain been there?" she asked, placing the blood pressure cuff around his arm. He shifted on the bed, his hand never leaving the same spot over his lower left abdomen. "On and off since this morning," he said. "Felt like I pulled something at first. Now it is more like someone is squeezing." She watched his face as she palpated gently. The muscles under her fingers were tight. When she eased even a little pressure away, his expression relaxed too quickly. She noted it silently. "We will draw some blood, get imaging if the doctor agrees," she said. "You did the right thing coming in." The scanner in the corner of the charge desk crackled faintly through the partially closed curtain. "Dispatch to all units. Multi-vehicle collision reported on I-70 eastbound near exit 241. Possible entrapments. Fire and EMS responding." The man on the bed tried to joke. "That sounds worse than me," he said. Riley offered him a small smile. "Let us keep it that way." She stepped out of the room to grab supplies. The moment the curtain slipped back into place behind her, the energy in the hallway had shifted. Gloria stood near the nurse's station, shoulders squared, eyes sharp. A paramedic had come in early to restock, and now he stood beside the scanner, his brow furrowed as more information came through. "Reports of at least 4 vehicles," the radio voice said. 1 semi-3 passenger cars, multiple calls, traffic backing up in both directions. "That is ours," Gloria said. "They will divert to us." She raised her voice. "Listen up. We have a multi-car pileup on Maui 70 eastbound. Unknown number of criticals. Clear the trauma bay. If your patient can be safely moved, move them. If they cannot, tell me why." Chairs scraped, footsteps quickened. A nurse who had been half leaning on the desk stood straight and finished her coffee in one swallow. In the trauma bay, the quiet was replaced piece by piece. Sheets were thrown over mattresses. Crash carts were checked, drawers yanked open and slammed closed again. Oxygen tanks were rolled into place with hollow bangs. The overhead procedure lights flicked on, bathing the room in a bright, almost blue whiteness. Riley helped transfer the latter fall patient from a hallway gurney into a regular bed, unplugging monitors and reconnecting them with practiced speed. "Can he go to observation?" she called to the resident. "Yes," the resident replied, already turning to another chart. "He is stable." Gloria moved like a conductor through the space. "You take bed 9 to fast track. You finish your discharge in 2 minutes or less. If you are waiting on labs and your gut says they are fine, you tell the attending what your gut said and you make room." Riley felt the familiar tightening in her chest that came with hearing the word pile up. It had layers. Asphalt, metal, glass, bone. More than one of everything. Her hand smoothed the sheet under her current patient automatically. She glanced at the monitor, checked his numbers again, then walked back to the desk. "Bay 4 is soft but holding," she reported to Gloria. "He needs imaging, but not this second." "Good," Gloria said. "He will get bumped. Keep a close eye." Gloria clicked the intercom. "Security, this is ER. We need the ambulance bay completely clear. No parked cars, no visitor vehicles. Expect multiple incoming." Riley looked up at the big clock, 8:15. Klein was still upstairs talking about numbers on a different kind of board. The radio crackled louder, now voices overlapping through the static. "Engine 12 on scene. We have a jackknife semi and 3 sedans. Repeat, 3 sedans. At least 5 patients. Request additional ambulances." Another voice layered in. Medic 21 on scene, 1 critical trapped, starting extrication. The words painted pictures whether anyone wanted them or not. Gloria blew out a slow breath through her nose. I want respiratory in here, she said, and someone get Myers. Dr. Luke Myers appeared a minute later, hair slightly mussed, stethoscope askew. Sleep still clung to the corners of his eyes, but adrenaline was already smoothing it away. You called, he said, and that... He said, we are about to get multiple traumas without Klein, Gloria told him. You are my doctor in the bay until someone with more letters shows up. Myers swallowed. Okay, he said. Yeah, okay, we can handle that. His gaze flicked briefly to Riley as if looking for confirmation. She did not nod or shake her head. She only held his eyes for half a second. The room knows what to do, she said. You just have to listen to it. He gave a short laugh that sounded more like a cough. That is the strangest advice I have heard all week, he replied. Outside faint at first came the rising sound of sirens. They grew quick, dovetailing into one another as more units approached. The pitch changed as they turned into the hospital's side entrance and cut off abruptly when the engines shut down. The automatic doors to the ambulance bay slid open. Cold air rushed in along with a smell Riley knew too well. Wet clothing, hot metal gasoline, the sharp scent of fresh blood not yet dulled by air. The first stretcher came through, pushed by 2 paramedics in heavy jackets. Male, 42 front seat of sedan, one of them called as they rolled. Found unresponsive, GCS-6 on scene, suspected head trauma, decreased, breath sounds on the right, blood pressure 80s over 50, heart rate 130 and climbing. They steered him into the first trauma bed. An airway cart appeared as if conjured. A respiratory therapist materialized at the head of the bed, hands already on the bag valve mask. The second stretcher followed close behind. Female, early 30s, the paramedic shouted. Passenger in the rear car, massive bleed from right groin and thigh. Tourniquet applied on scene but still saturating dressings. Pressure poor, heart rate 140. Blood had soaked through the field bandages and dripped onto the floor in a dotted line. They took her to the second bed. The third stretcher hesitated for a fraction of a second at the door as the paramedics maneuvered around equipment. Teen male 17, came the call. Backseat, no seatbelt, complaining of chest pain and shortness of breath, blood pressure decent for now, tenderness along the left ribs, oxygen mid-90s on 2 liters but dropping. He gritted his teeth against a groan as they transferred him from the ambulance gurney to the hospital bed. His cheeks were pale under a smear of road grime. The room filled rapidly. Voices layered over each other. Can we get him on the monitor? Hang a leader wide open. I need more hands on this side. Where's the trauma surgeon? Myers planted himself near the foot of the bed of the first patient, the unresponsive man. Okay, Petal, he said loudly, more for himself than for anyone else. We prioritize airway and circulation. Respiratory, you are on bagging. I want a line team on each patient. Lines monitors blood draws IV bags. The usual choreography sped up and played with an extra edge. On the second bed, the woman with the thigh bleed was losing the race. Blood seeped insistently around the tourniquet pooling under her, despite the towel stuffed along her leg. Her eyes flickered unfocused, then rolled back, then snapped forward again as if she refused to accept what was happening. My baby, she said thickly. Somebody get my baby. There was no child in the car, ma'am, a paramedic said, voice raised over the noise. You were alone. My baby, she repeated the words disintegrating into a low moan. Riley slid into position near her hip hands, pressing into a thick wad of gauze over the wound. She felt warm blood spread under her fingers. Her forearms tightened as she increased the pressure. I need a pressure bag on that fluid, someone called. We are out of large-bore catheters in this bin, another voice answered. Who restocked this? In the corner, a tech fumbled with an IV kit plastic clattering to the floor. A nurse bent to grab it, almost collided with another nurse carrying a tray of syringes. The 2 of them muttered apologies and moved on. The teenage boy on the third bed tried to sit up. I cannot breathe right, he said through short, shallow gas. It feels like my chest is folding. Lie back, the nurse at his side told him firmly. You will make it worse. He tried to obey, but his eyes went wide with panic. The monitor next to his bed showed his oxygen saturation dipping numbers sliding down from mid-90s to high 80s. Myers glanced between beds. Somebody keep him flat, he said. We need to rule out a pneumothorax. The respiratory therapist at the first bed lifted her head. His breath sounds are diminished on the right, she said of the unresponsive man. It is not moving well over here. We will get a chest x-ray, Myers replied automatically. Call for portable. The words were gone almost as soon as he said them, swallowed by the room. Riley pressed harder against the bleeding thigh. Her shoulders ached. She could feel the pulse under her hands, rapid and thready, beating against her palms, then stuttering. She's losing volume fast, she said, raising her voice enough to cut through some of the noise. She needs blood now and a better clamp. We are getting there, Myers answered. One thing at a time. The overhead speaker chimed. Portable X-ray to trauma bay, a disembodied voice announced as if it were any other night. A nurse ran in with another unit of saline skidding slightly in a slick of fluid on the floor. His shoe squeaked ankle-rolling, but he caught himself on the edge of the bed. Watch your feet, Gloria called. We do not need a fourth patient in this room. Riley shifted her stance, widening her base, careful not to slip. The teenage boy's monitor beeped faster. 78%, yeah. The nurse at his bedside called. He is dropping. The boy's lips had turned a bluish gray at the edges. His chest rose stiffly on one side more than the other. Veins stood out along his neck and temples. It hurts, he gasped. It is like something is sitting on me. Myers moved to his side, stethoscope already in his ears. He listened quickly to one side of the chest, then the other. His forehead creased. Breath sounds almost absent on the left, he said. Trachea looks deviated. This is a tension pneumothorax. Page surgery, someone said. There is no time, someone else replied. We need to decompress. The words dropped into the room like another kind of alarm. A nurse near the supply cart reached for the drawer with the larger needles, then hesitated, her hand hovering. Does anyone know how to do that? She asked, her voice tighter than she wanted it to be. Silence gathered under the noise. The monitors kept beeping. The woman on the second bed kept bleeding. The unresponsive man's chest kept barely rising under the bag valve mask. The question hung there unanswered for a breath longer than the room could afford. The question hung there thin and sharp. Does anyone know how to do that? The teenage boy's oxygen saturation slid to 75, then 73. His breaths came in short, desperate pulls that did not seem to reach anywhere useful. His eyes flicked wildly between the ceiling and the faces bending over him. Riley felt the whole room lean away from the moment. Heads turned toward Myers. The resident's hand tightened on his stethoscope until his knuckles blanched. He opened his mouth, closed it again. Tension pneumo, he said. He needs needle decompression. His voice held the right words. It did not hold the next step. Then do it, the nurse at the boy's side said. Myers looked at the cart where the large bore needles waited. His fingers twitched toward them, then curled back into his palm. I have only done it on a cadaver, he admitted too quietly at first, then louder. Never on a live chest. The teenage boy tried to lift his hand, grabbed for Riley's sleeve instead. His grip was weak but frantic. It hurts, he choked out. I cannot get air. The monitor answered him with a brittle series of beeps. 70. Riley's own lungs felt full and empty at the same time. She could hear the beat of her own pulse in her ears layered over the noise of the room. Under her palms, where they pressed into the bleeding thigh of the second patient, the pulse there was thinning out. 2 fronts, 1 pair of hands. Gloria, Riley said. Her voice cut cleanly across the chaos. It was not loud, but it did not wobble. The charge nurse looked up from where she stood near the head of the first bed. Riley held her gaze for a single second. Something passed between them that was not a complete sentence. Gloria gave the smallest nod. You have 10 seconds, she said. Riley shifted her weight and pressed her forearm into the wad of gauze on the woman's thigh, pinning it in place. A nurse beside her read the move and leaned in, layering her own weight over Riley's arm. Do not let go, Riley said, not for anything. The nurse nodded, jaw set. Riley stepped away from the blood and toward the boy. She snapped on a fresh pair of gloves as she moved. The latex snapped against her wrists. Her fingers were steady. Move, she said to no one in particular, and a small space opened around the left side of the boy's chest. His t-shirt had already been cut open to access the monitor leads. She pulled the fabric farther aside. The skin beneath was mottled with bruises blossoming along the ribs. 2 large bore, she said, 14 gauge. Get me Chlorhex. A tech fumbled out the requested needle. A nurse slapped a brown antiseptic pad into her palm. Riley tilted her head just enough to meet the boy's eyes. I know it is hard to breathe, she said. I'm going to fix that. Do not talk. Just look at the lights for me. His pupils locked on the harsh circle of the overhead lamp. She found the second intercostal space in the mid-clavicular line, her fingertips, counting ribs, feeling the slight give between bone and cartilage. Her mind overlaid another image, a desert night, a dust-covered vest under her hand instead of a thin hospital sheet. Her fingers did not care about the difference. Chlorhex burned cold against the boy's skin as she swabbed in widening circles. She uncapped the needle, its steel gleam catching the light. For a heartbeat, the room seemed to narrow to the span of her hand, the soft resistance of skin, the imagined space inside where air was trapped and crushing a lung. She drove the needle in. There was a tight, yielding pop as the tip passed from tissue into pleural space. The sensation traveled up the barrel into her grip. A moment later, there was an audible hiss as compressed air forced its way back out along the metal. The boy's body shuddered. His next breath did not hitch as sharply. The left side of his chest rose a little more. The monitor, which had dipped to 68, climbed to 72, then 78. "Bag him," she said, slow and steady. The nurse at his head squeezed the bag valve mask in a measured rhythm, syncing the breaths with the boy's own. Myers stared eyes wide. "Textbook," he muttered. "That was textbook." Riley withdrew the needle, left the catheter in place as a makeshift vent, and taped it down quickly. "Secure that," she told the nurse, then turned back toward the hemorrhaging woman, without waiting for praise. Blood still seeped beneath the gauze, but the flow had shifted. Slower now, not enough. The woman's skin had taken on a waxy pallor. Her lips were pale except for a bright smear of lipstick at one corner. Her eyelids fluttered. "My baby," she whispered again. The word tangled with the clatter around her. "She has lost too much volume," Riley said, reclaiming her spot at the bedside. She replaced her forearm with both hands, fingers digging in deep around the wound. "She needs a proper clamp at the junction. Where is that blood?" "We are hanging the first unit," someone answered. "Her pressure is 60 over something unreadable," another voice reported. "She needs a JT," Riley said. "A what?" Myers asked, moving closer. "A junctional tourniquet," Riley said. "We do not have the kit, so we build one." Myers blinked. "Out of what?" Riley scanned the room. To her, it suddenly looked like the inside of a supply truck again, everything a potential tool. 2 blood pressure cuffs, she said, 1 pelvic binder, and more towels. A tech sprinted to the supply cart, grabbed the cuffs and the folded binder, and hurried back. A nurse dropped a stack of clean towels onto the counter, the fabric thudding softly. Riley eased one hand away from the wound just long enough to shove a towel deep into the crease of the woman's groin, closer to where the artery branched near the pelvis, then clamped down again. "Slide the binder under her hips," she ordered, "high as it will go." 2 staff members lifted the woman just enough to snake the binder beneath her. Blood smeared onto the plastic. "Now the cuffs," Riley said, 1 on each side over the femoral triangle. Her fingers guided the placement even as she maintained pressure. The cuffs wrapped around the upper thighs snug against inguinal crease and pelvis. "Inflate to 200, she said. "Watch her face." Air hissed into the cuffs, the rubber tightening, compressing tissue inward, back toward bone. The woman groaned, teeth gritting. "I know," Riley said, her tone low. "Hold on, this is buying you time." The flow beneath her hands slowed further, then became a seep, then a wet dampness. The monitor above the bed flickered, its numbers wavering, then inching upward by a few points. "Pressure is 65 over 40, someone announced. "Still low, but not free-falling." "Keep the blood going," Riley said. "Wide open, then reassess." Her shoulders burned. Her lower back ached from the angle. She ignored both. At the first bed, the unresponsive man's lungs continued to rise and fall under the bagging. His blood pressure remained precarious. Myers split his attention between the 3 patients, his face drawn tight with effort. "Respiratory pupueshu," he called. "We need to intubate him. He is not protecting his airway." The respiratory therapist nodded, reaching for the laryngoscope. "I can do it," Myers said quickly, stepping toward the head of the bed. "I need the practice." He picked up the laryngoscope handle. The metal looked heavier in his grip than it should have. His hand, still damp with sweat, slipped slightly on the smooth surface. Riley did not look up until she heard the first clink of the metal against teeth. She flicked her gaze toward the bed. Myers was hunched awkwardly, blade inserted but angled poorly. The man's neck was not positioned right. The view down his throat would be all soft tissue and no cords. "Pull back," the respiratory therapist said. "You are in his teeth." "I have it," Myers insisted. "I just need a second." A second stretched. Across that same second, the monitor at the head of the bed showed the oxygen saturation drifting down again away from the fragile stability they had fought for. Riley felt the thin line between time well used and time wasted. "Doctor," she said. He did not answer. "Doctor," she repeated louder. Myers glanced in her direction without lifting the blade. "I said I have it," he snapped. "Do not crowd me. You are just a nurse." The last words landed hard enough that even the respiratory therapist flinched. Riley's face did not change. "The patient does not," she said calmly. "His saturation is at 82 and dropping." Myers looked back at the monitor, saw the number, saw the heart rate creeping into a tachycardic climb. His grip tightened. "One more try," he said almost to himself. The blade trembled as he adjusted. The man's chest rose in shallow, unhelpful motions. Gloria took one step forward, eyes on the monitor, then on Myers, then on Riley. Her jaw flexed. "Luke," she said, voice flat, "move it." He hesitated, then backed away a single reluctant step, the scope still in his hand. Riley was already at the head of the bed. She took the laryngoscope from him without comment. Her fingers changed the angle of the patient's head, tilting it just right. She slid the blade in, along the tongue lifted, not levering on the teeth, but using her wrist and shoulder. The view opened in front of her, as familiar as the diagrams in her notebook and the countless repetitions on the mannequin. Pale structures glistening. There, the white arches of the vocal cords framed and waiting. "Tube," she said. The respiratory therapist pressed the endotracheal tube into her free hand. She advanced it with one smooth, unhurried motion, watched the cuff pass just beyond the cords, then stopped. "Hold," she said. She withdrew the blade, handed it back without looking, and took the bag from the therapist, attaching it to the tube. She squeezed, watched the chest rise symmetrically, listened with her stethoscope to both lungs. Airflow clear on both sides. "Good placement," the therapist confirmed, checking the carbon dioxide detector. The square changed color. The monitor responded, the oxygen saturation climbing from 79 to 88, then into the low 90s. The tightness in the room loosened by half a notch. Myers stepped back until his shoulders hit the wall. He stared at Riley's hands where they held the tube steady for the securing tape. "Where did you learn to do that like that?" he asked quietly. "So fast." Riley taped the tube, checked the ties, and finally looked up at him. "Practice, Wiate." Practice," she said. On the second bed, the woman's bleeding had slowed enough that the towels no longer turned red instantly. Her eyelids fluttered again. One hand twitched toward her abdomen, then fell back to the sheet, too heavy to lift. Riley returned to her, checked the cuffs, adjusted the binder, and reassessed the pressure of her own palms. She could feel the room shifting around her now. The sirens outside had stopped. The ambulances were empty. The staff at each bed took their cues from the state of the patients and from the few voices that had proven in the span of minutes to be steady. Gloria's eyes followed Riley as she moved, taking in more than just the technique. The way the younger nurse placed her feet on the slick floor, the way she never wasted a reach or a word. The way she had stepped into a space most people stepped away from. "Keep talking," Gloria called to the team at large. "If you need something, say it. If you see something, say it. Do not freeze." Her gaze returned to Riley for a heartbeat. Somewhere under the fluorescent glare and the shouts, Gloria saw something else layering itself over the scene. Not an emergency department in Denver, but a field station somewhere that smelled of sand and diesel instead of snow and exhaust. The same kind of light, the same kind of hands in the middle of it. For a few seconds, the trauma bay held a strange, fragile balance. 3 patients, 3 sets of numbers, 3 quiet battles running at once. The air felt thick with heat and breath and the copper scent of blood. The overhead lights hummed, faintly bright and indifferent. "Pressure is 70/45, someone called from the second bed. Heart rate 120 and slowing. "Keep it above 60, Gloria said. "If she dips again, I want to know before the monitor does." The teenage boy's oxygen saturation had climbed back into the high 80s. The catheter in his chest vented a thin, steady trickle of air, taped securely in place. His breaths were still fast, but they reached farther now. Color edged back into his lips. "What did you do?" he whispered hoarsely, eyes on Riley. "I gave your lung room to move," she said. "You are going to keep breathing. Let everyone else freak out for you." His mouth quirked at that, just barely. At the first bed, the intubated man lay motionless, chest rising and falling in clean mechanical rhythm as the respiratory therapist worked the bag. "Tube is secure," the therapist said. "We have bilateral breath sounds, good waveform sats in the low 90s. Myers nodded numbly. He still stood a half step back from the head of the bed, hands empty. A faint red mark showed across the back of one hand, where he had gripped the laryngoscope too tightly. Riley adjusted the tape one last time, then stepped away. As she did, the cuff of her scrub sleeve rode up along her forearm. Under the harsh white of the trauma lights, the pale line of an old scar caught the glow. It began near her wrist, a jagged path that ran up the length of her forearm before disappearing under the fabric. The pattern was not clean or straight. It curved in shallow arcs like small pieces of metal had kissed the skin on their way past and left their signatures behind. Her glove ended just below the lowest part of it. For a moment, the mark sat fully visible. Gloria saw it. She had seen scrapes, surgical scars, self-harm etchings, cigarette burns. This was none of those. The shape tugged at a memory, something half-forgotten and half-buried under years of other emergencies. Sand a tent, a young corpsman with that same kind of line on his arm. Shrapnel. "You are bleeding," a tech said suddenly, mistaking the scar for something fresh. Riley looked down. A thin streak of someone else's blood had smeared along the raised line, emphasizing its path. She wiped it away with the edge of a clean towel, then instinctively tugged her sleeve back into place. "I am fine," she said. "Keep watching her pressure." Gloria did not look away. Her eyes traced the edge of Riley's covered forearm, then traveled up to her face. What she saw there was not new, not really. The stillness, the stripped-down focus, the lack of visible panic, even with 3 sick bodies in one room. It just made more sense now. "Riley?" She called, her voice tighter than before. Riley glanced over. "Yes." You need a break, Gloria said. You are going to lock up if you do not step back for a minute. I am all right, Riley answered. Let me recheck her distal pulse, then I will swap out. She slid her fingers to the woman's ankle, found the faint thud of blood pushing past all the compression and clamps. Weak, but present. There, Riley said softly, almost to herself. Good. She stepped away from the bed. Another nurse slid in to take her place without interruption, hands fitting into the space Riley had left, as if it had always been there. Gloria jerked her chin toward the sink in the corner. Wash, she said, now. Riley peeled off her gloves, the latex snapping the air once more, and crossed to the sink. She pressed the foot pedal. Water poured in a narrow, steady stream cooler than room temperature, just warm enough to keep her fingers from going numb. She held her hands under it, wrists tilted, watching the thin rivers of pink swirl down the drain. Soap foamed between her fingers, over her knuckles, under her nails. The scent of hospital soap was sharp and artificial, but it had its own comfort. In the stainless steel panel above the sink, her reflection bent and warped. Her face looked paler than usual, a fine sheen of sweat along her hairline. Her eyes were dark, almost too big. Behind her, in that same distorted reflection, she could see the blur of the trauma bay. Figures moving heads, turning monitors flashing. The shape of Gloria, the shape of Myers, the shapes of patients. And high in the corner, a small black dome in the ceiling. One of the security cameras, its smoke glass surface hiding the lens inside. It watched everything always on. Riley shut off the water and reached for a paper towel. She rubbed her hands dry slower than the speed her body usually asked for, letting the burn in her forearms settle. Footsteps approached behind her. You always do that, Gloria said, stopping just to her left. You throw yourself into the middle and then pretend it did not happen. Riley tossed the towel into the bin. I washed, she said. I am not pretending. You know that is not what I mean, Gloria replied. She folded her arms, the clipboard tucked under one elbow now. Those were not beginner moves, she said. That chest, that junctional build, that tube. You do not learn that in a skills lab on the 4th floor. Riley's gaze drifted back to the reflection in the metal. Maybe I got lucky, she said. Do not insult me, Gloria answered quietly. And do not insult yourself. For a moment, the only sound between them was the steady beep of the nearest monitor and the murmur of voices at the beds. Gloria's eyes dropped to the place on Riley's sleeve where the scar had been. How long? She asked. How long were you over there? Riley's shoulders tightened a fraction. Over where, she said, but the question had no weight. Where they teach you to build tourniquets out of blood pressure cuffs, Gloria said. Where they teach you to cut seconds into pieces and live inside them. Where they teach you that kind of stillness. Riley turned to face her fully. The fluorescent lights flattened the colors in her face. They could not flatten the lines of it. Long enough, she said. Gloria waited for more. None came. You know, Gloria said after a moment, I watched your hands the first day you started. You were shaking until you walked into the patient rooms. Then they stopped. That is backwards for most people. Riley's mouth curved in a small, humorless smile. Maybe it is just how I am built. Gloria shook her head. No, that is how you were made and remade. There is a difference. A shout from the beds cut through the bubble around them. Her pressure is dipping again, someone called. 55 systolic. Gloria turned her head. I need you back in there, she said quickly. But hear me, Ward. You are not invisible in this room. Not anymore. People saw what you did. Riley's eyes flicked toward the dome camera, then back to the beds. They did not see everything, she said quietly. Enough, Gloria replied. She reached out and tapped 2 fingers lightly against Riley's forearm over the hidden scar. These do not belong to a rookie, she said. Whatever you think you are hiding, it is leaking out your sleeves. Riley exhaled a breath that carried more weight than the air it moved. I am not hiding, she said. I am just working. Good, Gloria said. Then go work. Riley walked back into the center of the bay. The woman on the second bed lay very still, eyes half open. The numbers above her head wavered. One of the cuffs on her thigh had slipped slightly as she shifted. Riley adjusted it, rechecked the binder, pressed her hands back into position. You are still here, she said to the woman, whether or not the patient could hear. That is the only job you have right now. The teenage boy watched her from his own bed chest, rising more easily. You are like special forces or something. He mumbled, the edges of his words fuzzed by pain medication. Riley shook her head. I am the night shift, she said. Close your eyes. He did. On the first bed, Myers cleared his throat. Nurse Ward, he said. You must go, he said. She looked over, expecting another barked correction or a cautious order. Instead, his face was flushed with something that looked more like shame than anger. I was out of line, he said. His voice barely carried beyond their half of the room. When I said you were just a nurse. Riley held his gaze. You were scared, she said. So were you, he replied. She thought about that. No, she said finally. I was busy. He let out a short, choked laugh. I will take that, he said. Still, I am sorry. She inclined her head. Accepted, she replied. But I am still going to correct you if you point the blade at his teeth again. Please do, he said, loudly. The corners of her mouth lifted for a second. Then she turned back to the bleeding woman's leg. On the periphery, nurses moved with new caution around her. Not afraid, more aware. The way people stepped a fraction of an inch to the side when they realized they had been bumping into a pillar the entire time. A tech at the edge of the room whispered to another too quiet to carry over the noise. Did you see her hands, he said, the way she held that needle? The way she did that tourniquet thing, the other replied. I did not even know you could do that. Where do you learn something like that? The first asked. Neither had an answer. Above them, all the small black dome of the security camera sat in its corner, its lens capturing every movement, every gesture, every drop of blood, and every adjustment of tape. It recorded Riley's scar flashing in the light, Gloria's glance, Myers's stumble and apology, the improvised devices, the chest rising again after it had almost stopped. The emergency department settled into a new rhythm, not calm, not safe, but stable for the moment. People still shouted, machines still beeped, fluorescent lights still flattened everything they touched. In the middle of it, Riley's hands kept moving steady and unhurried, as if they had found a groove they knew by heart. The worst of the storm passed in the span of 20 minutes. It did not feel that way to anyone in the trauma bay. By the time the last unit of blood was hung for the woman on the second bed, the floor under her looked like a crime scene. Towels and wrappers piled in the trash bin, red smears leading to it and back. Someone had thrown sand down to soak up one slick patch where a boot had slid. The teenage boy with the chest catheter had drifted into a shallow sleep, his breaths noisy but even. A nurse sat on a stool at his side chart in her lap, fingers resting lightly on his pulse. The intubated man lay motionless, machines breathing for him, the hiss and sigh of the bag valve mask replaced by the quieter mechanical pull of a ventilator brought down from ICU. The room no longer crackled with panic. It vibrated with something lower and heavier. Fatigue mingled with the thin thread of vigilance that refused to let anyone fully relax. Gloria checked each bed in turn. Where are we? She asked the nearest nurse at the second bed. Pressure is holding around 70/40, the nurse replied. Heart rate just under 120. She squeezed my hand once. Good, Gloria said. Keep the cuffs where they are. Do not get creative. At the first bed, she looked to Myers. Neurostatus. Unchanged, he said. No response to painful stimuli. Pupils equal slow. We need to get him to CT. As soon as radiology stops pretending we are making this up, Gloria replied. I have already called twice. She turned to the third bed. He is okay, the nurse there said of the teen. Sats in the low 90s, pain at a 6 with meds. Scared, but who is not? Gloria nodded. All right, she said. You did good work, all of you. Now reset this place before the next wave hits. New sheets, restock, mop. I want this room to forget we were just in it. They moved. Old linens were stripped, leaving briefly exposed plastic that squeaked under gloved hands. Fresh sheets snapped in the air before settling into place. Trash bags were tied off and lifted away, replaced with clean ones. A housekeeper in green scrubs pushed a mop across the floor with quick, efficient strokes. Riley stayed by the woman's side until the blood bank sent up another unit and the lab called back with confirmation of her type and screen. Only then did Gloria touch her elbow. ICU is ready to take her, she said. Transfer team is on the way. They will keep the cuffs until surgery decides what to do. So Riley nodded. She watched as the woman was carefully shifted to a transport gurney, the binder, an improvised junctional device flagged with bright tape and handwritten notes. The woman's eyelids fluttered once. My baby, she whispered again. You are still here to ask, Riley said. We will find whoever you need. The gurney rolled out. The room felt a fraction larger. Riley's body felt both too heavy and too light. Her arms had that hollow ache that came after prolonged tension. Her fingers twitched occasionally small ghost movements as if they were still pressing, still clamping, still guiding a tube past unseen structures. You all right? Gloria asked her quietly. Yes, Riley said. The answer was not entirely true, but it was functional. Voices from the hallway started to reassert themselves. A complaint about a missing lab result. Laughter from the nurse's station as someone told a joke about a patient who swore their cat had tried to strangle them in their sleep. The emergency department as a whole had noticed the spike of intensity and then absorbed it like a muscle that had done this before. The only evidence left in the trauma bay that anything unusual had happened was a fine layer of tension in the air. It hovered just below the level where it burned. At 8:45, the overhead intercom crackled. Dr. Klein to the emergency department, the operator announced. Dr. Klein, please return to the emergency department. The words carried a particular cadence, as if the person speaking them knew they were delivering something the room was waiting for. Riley instinctively looked toward the ambulance entrance, even though she knew he would not come that way. He appeared instead through the staff door near the nurse's station, white coat flaring briefly from his quick step. He had ditched the wool coat somewhere between the conference room and here. A faint red pressure mark lined the bridge of his nose where mask and glasses had sat for too long. His jaw worked once like he was still biting off a sentence from the meeting. "What did I miss?" he said before anyone could speak. His gaze swept over the main hall, then swung toward the trauma bay. For a heartbeat, he stood in the doorway and took it in. 3 filled beds, machines humming, staff moving, no shouting, no obvious chaos. "What happened?" he demanded. "Multi-car pileup on I-70, Gloria said, stepping up. 1 severe head trauma, 1 massive lower extremity bleed, 1 tension pneumothorax. All 3 are alive, for now." Klein absorbed the summary with a flicker of surprise that he hid quickly. "Who was leading?" he asked. "I had it point on assignment," Gloria said. "Myers handled medical orders." Klein's eyes landed on Myers. "How many times did you page surgery?" "Twice," Myers said. "No answer. They were in the main OR with 2 other cases." "And you intubated the head trauma." Myers shifted his weight, eyes dropping for a moment toward the bed. "Yes," he said. Then, after a beat that he did not quite manage to prevent with assistance, Klein followed the line of his glance. The ventilated man lay there, tube-secured vitals stable for the moment. Klein stepped to the side, evaluating the setup. His hand hovered near the tubing, checking connections, eyeing the tape job, the depth mark at the teeth. "This is clean," he said slowly. "Who taped this?" "I did," Riley said. His head lifted slightly, eyes narrowing. "You," he repeated. "She placed the tube," the respiratory therapist said, before she could decide whether to say more. "I confirmed with capnography." The words hung in the air. Klein turned fully toward Riley. "You intubated this patient?" "Yes." "On whose authorization?" Riley felt the weight of eyes from several directions. The junior nurses, the techs, even the housekeeper had paused in her mopping the wet pad, squeaking against the floor as it stilled. "He was losing his airway," she said. "There was no time to wait for an attending to get here." "Myers was here," Klein countered. "He attempted," Riley replied. Her voice stayed even. "The view was poor. The patient's saturation was dropping." "You decided you could do better," Klein said. "Is that it?" She did not flinch. "I decided he needed a tube," she said. Klein's jaw tightened. "You are an RN, he said. "You are not credentialed to perform intubations. You are not credentialed to perform needle decompressions. You are certainly not credentialed to improvise invasive hemorrhage hedge control devices." His gaze slid briefly to the blood pressure cuffs and binder that had not yet been cleared from the second bed. "You have violated protocol scope of practice and about a dozen hospital policies I can name without looking at a manual." Gloria stepped in. "Nathan," she said quietly, "look at them." He did again. The ventilated man breathing. The woman with the thigh bleed still perfusing. The teenage boy with the chest catheter watching from his bed, eyes wide and more alive than they would have been without air. "This is not about outcomes," Klein said sharply. "This is about process. We do not get to break rules just because we think we can fix whatever happens." His voice rose enough that the sound bled into the hallway, tugging more attention to their way. "There were no physicians available to perform those procedures when they needed to be done," Gloria said. "She had the skill. She stepped in." "And if she had failed," Klein snapped, "who would carry that? She would. I would. The hospital would. The family would sue everyone whose name they could spell. Do you understand the liability you have dropped on my department?" He was looking at Riley again, now the force of his frustration and leftover anger from the budget meeting funneling into a single narrow focus. "You think I do not know what happens when something goes wrong?" Riley said softly. "Clearly not," he answered. "Or you would have stayed in your lane and waited for someone qualified." Myers cleared his throat. "Dr. Klein," he said. "Yeah." He said, "With respect, if she had not done what she did, we would have lost at least one of them, maybe 2. Klein rounded on him. "You let her take over," he said. "You ceded your role in front of the entire team. You validated chaos." "It was not chaos," Myers said. His voice wobbled, then steadied. "It was control. I did not have it. She did." The admission cost him. It showed. Klein looked almost taken aback for a moment, then anger reasserted itself. "You realize what you are all saying," he said to the room at large. "You realize you are standing here in my trauma bay, telling me that a nurse should be running critical procedures while the physician watches." Nobody answered. Silence gathered around the edges of the machines, edging out the beeps and alarms, until only the steady rhythms remained. Klein returned his attention to Riley. "From the day you walked in here," he said, I told you this environment requires respect for protocols. I told you this is not a place for improvisation or quiet rebellion. You smiled and nodded and gave me that same answer you are giving me now. He took a step closer. You do not get to turn this into your own personal proving ground, he said. Not with my patients, not with my staff. You put this hospital at risk tonight, and you put yourself at risk. If one thing had gone sideways, you would be done. Your license, your job, your freedom, gone. His voice had dropped in volume, but the intensity in it was sharper than when he shouted. Riley held her ground. Her hands hung loose at her sides, fingers relaxed, not curled. They were dying, she said. People come here dying every day, Cassia, Klein replied. We save some, we lose some. We do it within the system that exists, not by pretending we are alone in a field tent with no backup. He shook his head, a short, hard movement. This is not a war zone, he said. This is a hospital. The words landed between them heavy and ironic in a way he did not intend. Gloria's lips pressed into a thin line. Nathan, she said. He did not look at her. I will be reporting this, he said to Riley. Formally, the chief medical officer is going to hear exactly what happened here. He glanced up then toward the rounded black dome in the corner of the ceiling. And we have video, he added. Every move you made is on record. No one will have to take my word or yours. Riley followed his gaze. The camera stared back, mute and all-seeing. I know, she said. Something in her tone made Gloria look at her sharply. Klein mistook it for resignation. For now, you are off the trauma bay, he went on. You are off any high-acuity cases until this is reviewed. You will confine your duties to low-risk patients. If I hear a whisper of you doing otherwise, you will clock out and not come back in. The words spread through the room like a chill. A nurse at the edge of the bay shifted her weight as if resisting the urge to step closer. Myers opened his mouth, then closed it, the muscle in his jaw jumping. Gloria's eyes flashed. You are punishing the one person who kept 3 patients from coding, she said, her voice flat. I am enforcing order, Klein replied. Because if I do not, the next time will not end this neatly. He took a breath, the kind you take when you have decided you are finished speaking. Get this place cleaned up, he said to the room, and get these transfers moving. We are not a parking lot. He turned toward the doorway. Riley did not move. Her chest rose and fell once the breath controlled. Her hands were still now the faint tremor of exertion, the only movement in them. Gloria stepped to her side, close enough that their sleeves brushed. You do not deserve that, she said under her breath. It is fine, Riley said. It is not. It is his lane, Riley replied. He is staying in it. The sounds of the emergency department flowed back around them, filling the spaces the confrontation had carved out. Stretcher wheels squeaked over tile. Someone laughed at a joke that had nothing to do with any of this. The overhead intercom announced a visitor at the main desk, and at the far end of the hall near the entrance from the main lobby, a new pair of footsteps entered the soundscape, measured heavy the click of polished soles on hospital floor. They cut through the ambient noise with a different kind of authority, heading straight toward the heart of the emergency department. The footsteps grew louder, unhurried, and precise. They rounded the corner from the main corridor into the emergency department, attached to a tall man in a dark green uniform that did not belong to any hospital. For a second, the room misread him as security. Then the details came into focus. The jacket was pressed so sharply that the seams looked like they could cut skin. The brass buttons reflected the fluorescent lights in small, bright circles. Bars of color and metal crowded his chest rows of ribbons and metals that made the air around him feel heavier. Polished shoes clicked once more on the tile before he stopped just inside the entrance. Conversation dropped a notch, heads turned. Gloria straightened almost involuntarily. A tech near the desk stepped back as if making way out of instinct. The man took in the scene with a quick, comprehensive scan. The beds, the staff, the stains that had not yet been mopped, the faces tilted toward him. His gaze paused briefly on the black dome of the camera in the corner. Then it moved, finding what it had come for, Riley. She stood near the edge of the trauma bay, slightly behind Gloria, her badge still clipped to her scrub top, her hands bare for the moment, fingers pressed lightly into her own palms. The man in uniform walked straight toward her. Excuse me, Klein said, moving to intercept. This is a restricted area. If you need the main desk, it is upstairs. The man did not alter his path. He slid a hand into his inside pocket and produced a leather case. He flipped it open in one practiced motion, revealing an identification card and a small silver emblem. Major General Elias Monroe, he said. United States Army Medical Command. The name carried enough weight that even the monitors seemed to quiet for a heartbeat. Klein's mouth snapped shut. His eyes flicked from the ID to the uniform, then to the field of ribbons and back. This is a civilian facility, General, he said, regrouping. We do not handle military scheduling here. You want the VA clinic on the other side of town. I know where I am, Monroe replied. His tone was courteous, not warm. I am here for one of your staff. He looked past Klein again. Riley Ward? Ward, he called. Nurse Ward. The room shifted. Several pairs of eyes settled on Riley. She did not move for a second. The sound of her name in that voice wrapped in that rank pressed against something in her chest that had been locked tight for a long time. Then she stepped forward. I am Riley Ward, she said. Yeah, she said. Monroe stopped 2 paces in front of her. Up close, she could see more details. Lines at the corners of his eyes that came from both laughter and long squints into harsh weather. A faint old scar at his jaw. The calm, assessing look of someone who had seen enough worse days to stop being impressed by most things. He looked at her carefully as if matching the person in front of him to an image in his head. Then he did something no one in the emergency department expected. He brought his heels together, straightened, and raised his right hand in a crisp salute. Not the casual half gesture you saw in movies. A formal regulation salute held in place with exactness directed at a nurse in a stained pair of navy scrubs. The room went almost silent. Riley's body reacted before her mind caught up. Her spine lengthened, her shoulders squared, her hand rose and returned the salute fingers aligned, palm flat, in a motion so clean that no one could mistake it for improvisation. Good to see you again, Captain Ward, Monroe said. The words settled over the space like a dropped stone. Captain, one of the younger nurses whispered too loudly in the quiet. Did he say captain? Klein looked from Monroe to Riley as if some crucial line on a chart had just changed value. Captain, he repeated. What exactly is going on here? Monroe lowered his hand. He turned slightly, addressing the room without fully breaking eye contact with Riley. For those who do not know, he said, this is Captain Riley Ward, call sign Viper 6, former lead combat medic Viper team during the siege of Sangar Ridge. A low murmur rippled through the staff. The words themselves were foreign to some ears, but the shape of them was not. Siege, lead, combat medic. Monroe continued. During that engagement, Captain Ward coordinated and executed field care under fire for 142 casualties. She kept them alive long enough to reach advanced treatment. Our records list her as one of the most decorated medics in the last 20 years. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The information carried on the stunned silence like radio waves. Gloria's eyes closed briefly, then opened again. Something like confirmation moved over her face. Myers stared at Riley as if she had walked out of a different story and into his. Klein looked as if his brain was trying to run 2 conflicting programs at once. This is a hospital, he said finally. Not a forward operating base. Whatever she was in the past, she is a nurse here. Monroe regarded him calmly. And tonight, he said, in your department she did what you trained her to do and what we trained her to do. She saved lives. He reached into his other pocket and pulled out a small tablet. He tapped the screen, then turned it so that Klein and Gloria could see. The glow lit their faces from below. Security camera footage played in silent color. Riley stepping up to the teenage boy's bed, locating the intercostal space, driving the needle into the chest. The hiss of air was not audible, but you could see the boy's shoulders relax. The angle shifted. Another camera showed the intubation. Myers attempting blade askew. Riley stepping in chin, tucked hand steady on the laryngoscope. The tube passing between the vocal cords, the monitor numbers climbing. Another view. Improvised junctional tourniquet. Cuffs, binder towels, hands pressing in the exact right place. Monroe paused the video. Our signal analysts flagged this pattern, he said. The needle deployment, the junctional build, the airway sequence. These are not common techniques. They are very specific to Viper doctrine, to your doctrine, Captain. He looked at Riley again. You did not exactly go to ground, Wuxi, he said. You left a trail for anyone who knew how to read it. Riley's mouth felt dry. I did my job, she said. Yes, Monroe agreed. You did. Klein shook his head as if clearing static. Her job, he said, was to operate within the scope of practice for an RN. Whatever she did in uniform is not relevant to that. It is relevant to the people in those beds, Monroe said, the first real edge entering his tone. Because when your protocols created a gap, her training filled it. Perfectly. He gestured toward the ventilated man and the teenage boy. Without that tube and that needle, your staff would be filling out death packets, he said. Instead, they are charting vitals. Klein flushed. I will not have a visiting officer come into my department and lecture me on liability, he said. I am responsible for the standards of care here. I cannot allow my staff to freelance critical procedures just because they once wore a different uniform. Monroe held his gaze. You are responsible for outcomes, he said. So am I. Tonight your nurse gave you outcomes you may not fully deserve. The words were matter-of-fact, not cruel. That made them land harder. Gloria inhaled sharply. General, she said. With respect, we are all on the same side in this room. I know, Monroe replied, which is why I am here instead of watching this through reports. He turned back to Riley. When you resigned your commission, he said, you did so with everything signed, sealed, and squared away. No loose ends, no drama. You said you wanted to come home and work where people did not shoot at you while you put in an IV. A flicker of something passed across Riley's face, memory sand-colored and hot. Yes, sir, she said. I accepted that, he continued. We all did. You earned that choice. He glanced around the department. But you have not exactly been idle, he said. You brought battlefield discipline into this place. Quiet, yes, patient, yes, but very clear. He tucked the tablet away. The Army is standing up a new forward medical training division, he said. We need someone to design its protocols, to teach young medics what you learned the hard way so they do not have to learn all of it in blood. He let that hang for a breath, then added, We are prepared to bring you back at the rank of major, full authority over curriculum and field practica. You would not be in the line anymore, Captain. You would be shaping it. A few people around them shifted as if they had been holding still too long. Major. The word sat alongside Captain Heavier Higher. Riley felt it settle into the space between her ribs, where so many other things lived. The emergency department seemed to shrink and expand at the same time. Part of her saw the narrow room with its scuffed floors and flickering lights. Another part saw a larger map. Bases, tents, helicopters stretching lines of stretchers under a fierce sun. Her hands flexed once at her sides. Monroe watched her without pressing. There is no wrong answer, he said. You have done enough already to justify either choice. Klein stared at him. You're actually asking her to leave, he said, in the middle of this. I am giving her an option, Monroe replied, something she did not have for a long time. He looked at Riley again. You can say no, he said. If you do, I will walk back out that door, and the only thing I will leave behind is a note for your administration about what you accomplished here tonight. No pressure, no punishment, just truth. Riley's eyes moved from Monroe to the beds, to the ventilated man whose chest rose and fell without effort now, to the woman who had wanted her baby and was still alive to want anything, to the teenage boy awake again, watching all of this, with the wary attentiveness of someone who had seen adults fail and succeed in quick succession, to Gloria, whose jaw was set and whose eyes were softer than usual, to Meyer standing a little straighter than he had at the start of his shift, the red mark on his hand fading, to the younger nurses and techs clustered just beyond the doorway, their faces curious and drawn and a little frightened. She thought of her apartment, the mannequin on the coffee table, the notebook with its worn pages, the sound of helicopters passing over Denver that did not belong to her anymore. She thought of her father's handwriting. Steady hands save more than fast ones. She inhaled. Sir, she said. Monroe's attention sharpened by a degree that would have been invisible to anyone who had not seen it before. I gave him a home on purpose, Riley said. Out there we did what we did so people could have quiet lives. Friday nights that end with someone complaining about parking and bad coffee, not gunfire. She gestured slightly around her. This, she said, is where those nights get saved when something goes wrong anyway. Monroe listened without interrupting. I am not done here, Riley said. I can teach, I can train, I can build better habits into this place. Unofficially maybe, but effectively, these people, this city, they are my lane right now. Her shoulders relaxed a fraction. So I have to decline, she finished, respectfully. For a moment the only sound was the soft hiss of the ventilator and the distant chime of the overhead intercom as someone in another wing called for a transport. Then Monroe smiled. It was small, but it reached his eyes. Respectfully received, he said. He straightened again, not in the rigid way of formality, but in the way of someone acknowledging a choice they can appreciate even if it complicates their own plans. In that case, he said, we will make sure the people who sign your paychecks understand what they have in this room. His gaze slid briefly to Klein. And what they almost lost, he added. Monroe let the words hang for a moment, not twisting them, not softening them. Klein stood as if someone had just pulled a rug an inch to the side under his feet. Small shift, big effect. His jaw flexed once, twice, like he was testing the fit of silence in his own mouth. General, he said finally, the word tight. Dr. Klein, Monroe replied. I spoke out of anger, Klein said. About liability, scope, I still have to answer for those things. That does not change what she did. He glanced at Riley, then back at Monroe. But I misjudged what it meant, he added. I did not know who she was. Monroe shook his head slightly. You knew enough, he said. You knew she had steady hands and a habit of being right in quiet ways. That should have been plenty. His tone was not cruel. If anything, there was a trace of something like weariness in it, the kind that came from delivering variations of the same message too many times in too many rooms. He took a breath and let it out slowly. I am not here to tell you how to run your department, he said. You clearly can get bodies through your doors and out again. I am here because I recognize a pattern. Places that do well in the long run know how to listen down the chain, not just up. He looked at Riley one last time. You know where to find me, he said quietly. If you ever change your mind. Yes, sir, she said. He brought his hand up again in a crisp salute. She returned it clean and precise. Then he turned and walked out, his footsteps clicking a steady line down the hall, the dark green of his uniform receding into the wash of white coats and scrubs until the automatic doors closed behind him with their usual soft sigh. The emergency department inhaled. Sound slowly crept back up to its normal level. A phone rang at the nurse's station. Someone called for a wheelchair. A monitor in a nearby room began to chime an impatient reminder about a low battery. Gloria rubbed her thumb and forefinger together once, as if testing the texture of the air. All right, she said louder now, more like herself. You heard the man. We are worth memo paper. A few people laughed, the sound a little wobbly but real. Back to work, she added. The crowd that had gathered near the trauma bay doors thinned. Nurses returned to their assignments. Techs rolled empty stretchers away. The housekeeper resumed mopping, leaving wet arcs that reflected the overhead lights. Klein stayed where he was for a moment longer, looking at the empty doorway Monroe had just gone through, then at Riley. Walk with me, he said. It was not a request. Old habits. Riley hesitated, then followed him out of the trauma bay and into a short side corridor that led toward the staff lounge. The overhead lights were dimmer here, the sounds from the main department muted enough that individual voices blurred into a distant wash. Klein stopped near a supply cabinet, rested one hand on the edge of the counter, and stared at the laminate for a few seconds. When he spoke, his voice was quieter than it had been in the trauma bay. It seemed to fit better that way. I have been chief in this department for 8 years, he said. Before that, I was the young hotshot who thought he was smarter than gravity. I have seen a lot of people come through those doors, thinking they were going to fix everything. He looked up. I do not like surprises, he said, especially the kind in uniform with stars on their shoulders. Riley said nothing. Klein exhaled. I was wrong about you. He said the words blunt. That is what this is. He rubbed his forehead where the mask had left its mark. I saw a quiet nurse who took orders well and did not argue, he went on. In my head, that equaled fragile, soft. Someone I needed to protect from the worst of it by keeping you out of the trauma bay. His mouth twisted briefly. Turns out I was trying to shelter the one person in the room who has already seen worse than most of us ever will, he said. The fluorescent light buzzing overhead flickered once, then steadied. I am not apologizing because a general with a tablet told me I should, he said. I am apologizing because I just watched my resident admit his limits in front of his staff, and I would like to be at least as brave as he was. Riley's grip on the strap of her badge loosened a fraction. You do not owe me that, she said. I disagree, he replied. I owe you more than that. But right now this is what I can give without tripping over my own ego. He pushed away from the counter and turned fully toward her. You put your hands on my patients and did things that kept them alive, he said. You did it knowing it could cost you your job and your license if anything went wrong. You did it anyway. He swallowed. I treated that as insubordination, Pierre, he said. I treated you as a problem instead of as an asset. I am sorry. Silence stretched a moment, not uncomfortable, just full. Riley studied his face. The lines around his eyes, the grooves at the corners of his mouth, the tiredness that had been masked by anger earlier. I appreciate you saying that, she said. He nodded once. About the formal report, he added. I still have to file something. The cameras exist. The chief medical officer will see that footage. So will legal. That is a fact. I know, Riley said. But, Klein said, there is a big difference between reckless nurse ignores protocol and former combat medic performs emergency intervention in absence of attending staff. One corner of his mouth lifted. I know which one I'm going to write, he said. Riley's shoulders eased. Thank you, she said. Do not thank me yet, he replied. I'm also going to make your life harder in other ways. She tilted her head slightly. How is that? She asked. I'm going to ask you to teach us, he said. All of us. Not formally, not with some big announcement that will make you want to run. Quietly, consistently, the way you already do everything. He tapped 2 fingers lightly against his chest. I do not know what Viper Doctrine is, he Ni said. I do know that whatever you did in there tonight turned chaos into something that looked a lot like a plan. I want that written on our board, not just in your notebook at home. Riley pictured her notebook on the coffee table, the line that said breathe, bleed brain, the diagrams, the ink that belonged to her father. You want me to run classes, she said. I want you to show us how to be faster without being sloppy, Famawe, Klein said. How to see what you see when you walk into a room and know it is not fine yet, even though the numbers say it is. How to build something out of what is actually here, not what we wish we had. He gave a small wry shrug. I will stand at the front of the briefings and pretend it was my idea if it helps, he said. You can stand next to me or sit in the back and correct me when I get it wrong. A soft breath that was almost a laugh escaped her. You really hate surprises, she said. I do, he agreed, but I like second chances. He straightened. Think about it, he said. Then tell me what you need. Extra time, equipment, space. Within reason, we will find it. He started to turn away, then paused. And Ward, he said that, so, if you want. Yes. Whatever you were out there, he said quietly. Captain Viper Ghost Medic, whatever they called you, you do not have to pretend that part of you does not exist when you walk through our doors. You just have to aim it at the right targets. Her throat tightened. I will try, she said. Good, he replied. Now go do your charting. The day shift is starting to think we live here. He walked back toward the main department, his footsteps blending into the general noise. Riley stood alone in the corridor for a second, listening to the muffled sound of voices and machines. Her hands rested against the cool edge of the counter. The skin over her scar itched faintly, a phantom reminder. When she stepped back into the emergency department, the light seemed a little less harsh. Or maybe her eyes had adjusted. The hours that followed moved in smaller waves, a child with a fever that broke after a popsicle and some patience. An older man who had slipped on his front steps and cracked 2 ribs, stubbornly insisting he did not need pain meds. A college student who came in pale and clammy from a panic attack and left embarrassed but grateful after his heart proved solid. The trauma bay was stripped and reset by mid-morning. The beds looked ordinary again, sheets tucked tight, monitors blank waiting. Word about what had happened during the night traveled through the hospital in the usual way. Bits overheard in the cafeteria, fragments caught in elevators. A paramedic telling a story at the base. The story gained and lost details as it moved like anything alive. Somewhere in administration, someone drafted a memo. Somewhere else, someone else drafted a different kind of memo. A few days later, an envelope arrived in the ER with Riley's name typed neatly on the front. Inside was a single page on Army letterhead. To Ward Riley, RN, formerly CPT Viper Sick, for actions performed on the night of date resulting in preservation of life under acute conditions. People like you make the world quieter and safer. Do not ever call that small. There was no signature, just an initialed stamp in one corner. Riley folded the letter and slid it carefully into her backpack. That night at home, she placed it between the pages of her notebook, next to her father's handwriting. Weeks passed. On a gray morning with slush melting outside, Gloria called everyone to the entrance of the emergency department. There was a portable speaker on a cart playing low music. A maintenance worker stood on a small ladder, tightening bolts on a new metal plate fixed to the wall next to the trauma bay door. The plate was bronze, heavy and simple. No engravings of eagles or flags, just words cleanly cut. In honor of Riley Ward Aura, former Captain Viper 6, who chose to bring her quiet home. Never mistake quiet for weak. The room fell silent as people read it. Klein stood off to one side, hands in the pockets of his white coat. He did not speak. He did not need to. His presence there was loud enough. Gloria looked at Riley. You hate this, she said not unkindly. I do, Riley admitted. Good, Gloria said. Then it is probably exactly the right size. A nurse from Nights, one of the younger ones, stepped forward with a small bouquet of grocery store flowers, petals slightly wilted at the edges. She set them on the narrow ledge under the plaque. From all the people you make look better than they are, she said. There were a few soft laughs. Riley stood, hands loosely clasped, eyes on the words. They spelled my name right, she said. Do not get used to it, Gloria replied. The group scattered back to their shifts. The emergency department resumed its usual song. From then on, every person who walked into the trauma bay passed that plate. Some read it every time. Some stopped seeing it after a while, the way you stop seeing your own front door. But it was there, catching the light, waiting for eyes when they needed it. On a Friday evening, not long after Riley finished a 12-hour shift and stepped out into the parking lot, the sky was painted in the last thin streaks of sunset pink and orange smudged over the mountains. The air carried the clean cold of early night. She leaned against the hood of her car for a moment, letting the chill seep through her scrub top. A sound rose in the distance, not a siren, a different pitch. She looked up. A helicopter was cutting across the city lights, steady rotors chopping the air. It was not one of the air ambulances that landed on St. Jude's roof. The silhouette was broader, the paint darker. As it passed over the hospital, the nose dipped just a degree, a small tilt that most people would not notice. Riley did. She lifted one hand from her jacket pocket, palm up, fingers slightly curled as if testing the air. The helicopter continued on its path toward the horizon. She watched until it was a speck, then gone. Her hand dropped back to her side. The entrance lights of the emergency department glowed behind her bright against the gathering dark. Through the glass, she could see movement. A patient stepping up to the desk. A nurse laughing at something on a phone. A doctor bent over a chart. Riley pushed off the car, walked once around the lot to shake the stiffness from her legs, then headed toward the bus stop at the corner. Her car key stayed in her pocket. Halfway there, the small pager at her hip vibrated. She looked down. Code triage incoming rollover eat 10 minutes. She stood still for the space of one breath, then turned around. When she stepped back through the automatic doors, the familiar sound of monitors and voices wrapped around her. Gloria looked up from the charge desk. "Thought you were off," she said. "Traffic," Riley replied, slipping her backpack onto the shelf and reaching for a fresh pair of gloves. "Figured I might as well make myself useful." Gloria nodded once. "Trauma bay," she said. "You know the way." Riley did. Her hands were steady as she walked toward the bright waiting room, the plate on the wall, catching a thin slice of light as she passed. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story.